why your drums don't sound like your reference track.
We've all been there. I remember getting so frustrated earlier in my production where I put the drums in the right place, I used the right drums, and it just did not bang. And today I'm going to tell you why that is and how we can fix it. Before I hopped in, I wanted to mention that I'm currently offering mentorship on abletonliveteacher.com. It's an amazing website. The quickest way to get good at production is to have a one-on-one mentor, get all your questions answered directly. It's absolutely great. Also, I'm doing new videos practically daily, so hook your boy up, give me a subscribe, toss me a comment. All that helps. Thank you guys. All right, so let's hop into Ableton. So over here we have our Fire drum loop. It's not very fire, is it? Now we have our edited, processed drum loop. Now this is a pretty basic example, but I'm doing it this way so I can show you the principles and kind of how it stands out. So as we can hear, our first drum loop was lifeless, it was flat, it was robotic, it didn't have any body, it was plain, all that stuff. And it just didn't bang. It didn't. If we A-B this, it doesn't sound anything the same. So we're going to go into the top reasons why your drums don't sound like this. So getting into number one, and probably the most important, is groove. I can't tell you how many years I spent putting stuff right on grid because we're always taught that you want your stuff on time and this and that. Not true. Your groove is what's going to give your loop life. Your groove is going to be one of the biggest determining factors on if your beat is good or not. So to give you an example of what I mean by groove, I'd say there's like 4 or 5 main aspects of groove, and that would be, so to kind of explain what I mean by groove, here we have our first kick loop. So what we're doing here is we're using the same exact kick sample over and over again. And we don't necessarily want to use a different kick sample. We want to think about it as if we're a drummer. So if you're a drummer and you're playing, the kick pedal with your foot, you're going to accent them. You're going to accent them with velocity. You're going to accent them with timing. You're going to accent them with groove, with length, with pitch, with all that stuff. And that's what we really want to accomplish. So again, we have the first one. Versus the second. Now it's very subtle, but you'll see what I did is, for instance, on this kick right here, we turned it down a little bit and we nudged it a little bit off grid. So it's a little bit off time and it's a little bit quieter. So that little accent there really helps kind of accentuate the second kick or the main kick. Another place we did this is down here on the hi-hats. So like we have our first loop here, which there's some switch ups in here, but it's all robotic. It's same. No transposition, no gain adjustment, no pitch, anything like that. And then we have our one that we groove down here. So that off-gridness is really what makes like your head, your neck move and kind of like the groove of it. And when it's directly on grid, it's just too robotic. It doesn't sound humanized at all. So here what we did is we shuffled stuff off grid a little bit. We actually implemented a groove from a groove pool. So in Ableton you have right here where you can go to grooves and you could actually select one, drag it into your groove pool and then put it right on your audio or MIDI track. So that's what we did here. So we can hear the difference on and off. So it's accentuating the notes, it's making some louder, some quiet, some on and off grid, and that's really giving the life to our hats. We also did a couple pitch dips, like transpositions, so. Again, this is another thing that's gonna keep them moving, keep them lively. If your listener keeps hearing the same thing over and over again, it gets very boring. So just this little one semitone transposition bend in the middle kind of keeps stuff pushing. So that helps a lot. Really, there's countless ways to implement groove. Sometimes I'll come in here and manually just kind of nudge stuff off, nudge stuff around. A really good way to do it is using the track delay. To access that, you click the D in the bottom right corner. And you can see I did that with like these claps that we'll get to in a second here. But I nudged them 26 milliseconds to the right, so they're just a little bit late. So all that is going to be your groove. I'm going to do a video down the road completely on groove because it's so important and it's really changed my production. Again, notice I grooved the entire hi-hat pattern 16 milliseconds to the right. So that kind of stuff really gives like that head noddiness and like the feel to your beat. So the next one we're going to cover is, it's kind of a two-part one. It's sample selection and layering. So many times I hear people use like the stock Ableton drums, and I wouldn't use the stock Ableton drums. Let me put it that way. Some people do them and they do really good and they process them well and they sound good, but you really want the samples that are going to most reflect your style and what you're trying to accomplish. I make a lot of low-end stuff, a lot of bass stuff. One of my favorites is John Casey. He's got some fire samples. Anything on Splice, you know, if you're trying to replicate a certain style or genre, get those drums, you know, that'll make a huge difference. I know that might be common sense for some, but that'll make a huge difference instead of using just a generic snare. I also use drums that are cut from the same cloth. So samples from the same sample pack, samples from the same artist, stuff like that. So here I have my trap kind of bass hybrid trap samples in here. Another thing I do, especially with like the snare and the clap and everything, is I layer it. Now you don't want to just toss a bunch of different layers in there. It's kind of a feel thing where you'll know, okay, this can use a little bit of this or that. You don't necessarily want to just stack stuff up. What I'll do oftentimes is, in this example, I have my snare and then I have a clap that's pushed back. It's in the back and it's got a little bit of reverb on it. We can kind of hear the difference here. So it adds just that little bit of dimension, a little bit of depth, a little more texture and transient. And this is really like I was saying to feel. So you kind of have to, you typically want to stack stuff that has elements that the other one doesn't have. So like I have a super heavy or transient heavy snare here. And this clap is a little bit less transient heavy. It's a little bit more compressed and low. So the two of these together kind of gives you like a bigger, if your snare is sounding quiet or thin, layering like this and compressing will really kind of help beef it up a little bit. So going into our next subject is going to be depth and stereo imaging. In our first example here, the problem with this is that everything is right up front, everything is the same volume level, and everything is the same on the stereo field. So what I mean by that is you can think of your stereo field as like a stage. So I'm going to grab an imager here. This is a free plugin, I believe, Ozone 9 Imager. So our stereo image is where stuff is sitting in our headphones or on our monitors, on the left, on the right, or right in the middle. So as a rule of thumb, and this is just a guideline, it's not every time, but I would say the vast majority of the time, you want your lower elements in the middle. Like you want your sub bass in mono, or not, if not in mono, right in the middle. Same thing with your kick. You generally want your kick right in the middle. So we have our kick in our middle, and the higher the elements get, generally you want to spread them out towards the end. So I have my kick in the center. I might have my snare spread a little bit, and then I have like my hats and all my elements way on the side. And that's giving us space, that's giving us a sound stage, that's giving us depth, that's giving us all that stuff. Another great way to add depth is either lowering the gain of something, obviously, low passing it, so you're just cutting off the highs of the sound, or using a little bit more reverb. So when you cut off the highs of a sound, it's saying it's further back. To kind of give you an example of that, if we do that to our hats here. Now if we just cut off just a little bit of the highs, you'll notice that now it sounds like it's pushed further back. Same thing with if we adjust the fader here, or if we add a little bit more reverb. Be careful adding too much reverb though, it's very easy to do. So using these techniques, we can really add a lot of depth and kind of saying not everything is right up front in your face. We want your kick and your snare in your face. We don't necessarily want like your hats or your percussive elements there. All right, moving on, we're going to talk about a little bit of processing. And this is a big one that I didn't do for a very long time. It's definitely something to start implementing in your tracks and your drums immediately, and that's parallel compression. Parallel compression is compression, but on a split channel. So you're splitting the signal. You have your completely dry signal, and then you have your completely compressed signal. So the reason you do this is because when you have a drum loop, you have these transients, you know, these spikes hitting and everything. That's great, but then you don't really have like a dense signal. So when you parallel compress, what you're doing is you're having that dense compressed signal and your transients. So you're pretty much having your cake and eating it too. So I'll kind of show you what the difference is sounding wise of parallel compression. So that's without. Notice it makes your drums denser, it makes them thicker, it makes them bang more. Definitely parallel compression, like especially if you want like some slapping drums. Another one is group processing. Taking all your drums and processing them in the same way will kind of make them sound like they're from the same family. So if we take our whole drum group and we add some saturation to it, what we're doing is we're making it sound like it's all from the same drum kit or it's all from the same channel or whatever. So a little bit of saturation. Again, this is parallel. This is on another channel. Now it's subtle, but you can hear it. So a little bit of saturation really just kind of ties everything together. So this is a really good starting point. There's so much you can do with drums. There's so much you can do with processing. But here's a great way to get you started to making your drum loops sound like your references. If you have any other questions, just toss them in the comments. I'd be happy to help you guys. And thanks for tuning in. See you next time.